Greetings, Grade 28 leaders. So this might look a little bit different. I'm going to go over the handout with you from my screen as we look at the seventh commandment. So the seventh commandment is do not steal. Okay. Our opening is this question. For some, stealing is a solution to what? Followed by another question, stealing is rooted in what other than sin? Okay, so that'll be a way to kind of just get things started and to kind of kick off the discussion. And then you're going to move down to the actual Bible passage. And the first question is, can you steal with more than your hands? And if so, explain. So I want people to begin to expand their thinking a little bit on what this commandment means and speaks to. It says, because many of us think unless I take something from a store, it's not stealing. But you and I can steal most certainly with our eyes. We can glance at things that aren't ours as if they were. Example, men, you could steal a glance of a woman who is not your wife. Women, you too can steal glances of a man who is not your husband. And so it can be done with the eyes too. And so this is where I want to help us kind of expand that our ability and propensity to steal and sin in this way exceeds just physically taking something with our hands. Okay. And you can do it with your mind and all sorts of things. So you can kind of tease that out a little bit in your group. Then the next question is, think about, for a moment, about neighbors on both sides of your house or apartment, 2 friends at work or at school, and 2 relatives. So this should kind of lead you to think about 4 people and 2 families, let's say. And what we're wanting you to do is to think, as you think about those 6 groups or 6 people, we want you to kind of honestly assess whether or not in any of those 6 situations, is there something that is clear to you that that person or family needs and doesn't have. And so the hope, right, would be the Spirit would point something out if there is indeed something that they need, and that you might have the willingness to consider how you might meet that need. And just because you maybe can't meet all of it doesn't mean you can't meet it in part. And I think that often prevents us from helping in generous and giving ways, as we think, oh, I can't solve the whole problem of world hunger, but you can maybe stop it for one person, right? And so do we not do anything because we can't solve all of world hunger, or do we do what we can with what God has given us to have the impact, and as big or as little as it may seem, do we have that kind of impact? So I want you to think about that. Then we move on to some passages to look at. Matthew 5:42 is real simple, real straightforward from Jesus, though we have all sorts of warnings, justifications, and don't get burned speeches that we add to it that Jesus doesn't. So I want us to wrestle with that. 1 John 3:17, God's love lives in us when we help those in need. And so this is kind of helping us to kind of maybe convict a little bit and remind us that how we handle the excess of what God's given us in light of those who are in need determines whether or not the love of God is active and alive in us. Okay, so we're going to look at that a little bit. Then there's a quote from the Large Catechism, and then you're going to read the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the first question here with Luke 10 is asking you, so who is your neighbor? And we should come to the conclusion is anybody who we come across that's in need, okay? I think sometimes we live under the umbrella as neighbors only people that we know. And this question at the beginning of this parable is, who is my neighbor, right? And Jesus helps us to see it's the person who's in need. That's our neighbor, okay? And then lastly, we're asking you to make a list. What is the cost, as best we can tell, to the Samaritan? And what do we learn from this kind of goodness toward our neighbor? So the Samaritan, right, leaves some money with the innkeeper to help take care of this person who's been beaten. And he promises to give of his time in the future to come back by to see if there's anything that he owes, because maybe the person needed to stay longer than he thought. So this guy's making a real investment. He's not just throwing some money out the window and hoping he gets better. He's actually taking care of him, the first level needs, if you will, healing the wounds, and coming back to see if he's okay. And so I think this is an important aspect to this. And sometimes it's not just money out the window. It's maybe walking with somebody and sacrificing some time in the future to see this need through. Okay, so I want us to think a little bit more long term as it relates to this. I hope that you have a great study. This will be a fun one. Bye.